All right. Welcome, everybody. I'm sure we'll get a handful of more people that'll join us in the next couple of minutes and throughout the next half an hour. My name is Jackie Worster, and tonight is our emergency preparedness team meeting for November. We're excited to have so many people here tonight. This is awesome. So let's go around the room and introduce ourselves. Just say your name and what area of town you're coming to us from. You don't have to give your exact address or exact street, but the general area. I'm Jackie Worster, and I'm in the Hilliard and River Road area near River Road Elementary School. And I'll just go down the line here. Charles C., you're next.
Yes, I'm Charles C. Cartwright. I live on Norman Avenue, which is in the River Road neighborhood.
And Joel? Oh, you're muted, Joel.
You? Yes, I'm Joel Robe. I'm from the Santa Clara area off of River Loop 2.
Awesome. Ed?
I'm Ed Farron, and I live in the northwest corner of the Bethel neighborhood.
So way out west from us.
Near the airport.
Yeah, okay. Cindy?
I'm Cindy Harper, and I work at Central Lane, but I live in the Santa Clara area.
Awesome. Marcia?
I'm Marcia Pendleton. I'm a shift supervisor at the 911 Center, and I do not live in Eugene. I live in Springfield, but love this area.
Awesome. Stephen or Stephen?
Stephen King, and I'm Central Lane 911. I'm a dispatcher and CAT specialist. I live in the Northeast Neighbors area in the Gillum section of town.
Awesome. Welcome. Jerry?
Jerry Brown. I live in the Santa Clara area, member of Lazaro, member of the Santa Clara and the River Road communities.
Don?
Don Matheny, Southeast Neighbors.
Welcome. Andrea?
Hi, I'm Andrea Tobin, and I'm the training manager at Central Lane Communications.
Awesome. Welcome. And I believe that's Anne up next on the screen. Oh, you're muted, Anne. Oh, there we go.
Ann Mann. I live in the River Road area on Hilliard.
Welcome tonight. And Kat, looks like you're next.
She's still muted.
The game must be getting exciting. All right. I don't think we heard Kat, but we can come back to Kat a little bit later. All right, so we just have a couple of announcements today from our usual kind of team business that we talk about every month. And that first announcement that I wanted to share is we are trying to create a radio group for the River Road neighborhood, and I think also the Santa Clara and Bethel area. We want to grow that local communication network. There's a lot of work being done by the city and some of our emergency communications people like Jerry on the call here to establish a network of communications like ham radio operators and connecting to the emergency operations center like the city of Eugene. But we're trying to grow our network more at the neighborhood level. So we're looking at FRS radio users and other forms of communication. So this is still very new. It's not anything that's ongoing, but we're reaching out to people to see if anybody has interest in trying to grow this network and just start talking about that. Talking about radios, talking about who has a radio and who might be able to communicate in those events. So if you do have any interest and want to be a part of that effort, feel free to put your email in the chat tonight and we'll reach out when we have some next steps put together and maybe some gathering times of when we can all get together and talk. Does anybody have any questions on that they want to talk through real quick or other updates that they want to share?
I've got a little bit of an update. Basically, I was talking to Andy Davis, and his whole thing is we don't have teams at the neighborhood level to send that information up to these guys that are running the ham radios. So we have to start getting those developed or this whole system will break down. So that's where we definitely got to put our work into in the next year or two.
Yeah, good point. And I do want to call out that you don't have to have an FRS radio to be interested in this conversation. There are other forms of communication that we can try to work in and practice radio transmissions. You don't necessarily have to have an FRS, but we want to start those conversations. So drop a note in the chat and we're going to reach out with more information in the coming months about that. Our next announcement here is that the River Road Emergency Preparedness Team, we have been and now are more officially have been working with, collaborating with neighborhood leaders in Santa Clara and Bethel neighborhood. So that's Joel and Ed and Lynn from Bethel as well. We want to bring more brains to this preparedness party and kind of expand our reach to the whole Northwest Eugene area. Instead of being so concentrated within our individual neighborhoods, we want to try to collaborate together and share some of that responsibility, share some of that outreach to our neighbors. The more people we can reach, the better to be prepared. We've identified a ton of projects that can get our neighborhood to a more prepared and ready and resilient state, but we need help to execute on a lot of those projects. And I noted some of the things that we've come up. These are very high level, but we want to plan a tabletop evacuation exercise. So an emergency that happens, and then we kind of talk through what that evacuation might look like. Organizing preparedness tips for our households around the neighborhood and creating marketing materials to get the word out, creating that communications network, the radio network that we just talked about, reaching out to schools and businesses. We have tons of projects like this that we need help on. So if anybody has any interest in those efforts, planning, everybody has individual skills. So if you have time and want to step up more outside of these monthly meetings that you want to get interested, drop a note in the chat and we would love to bring you into any of those planning conversations. There's a lot going on. Any other questions, announcements that anybody else has tonight? All right. So now I think we're on to our main event. Tonight we're joined by several people here from Central Lane 911, Cindy Harper and her team. They're here to share their experiences and some information about the services that they offer. So this is going to be a very different perspective on emergency preparedness than what we talk about in the last few months. And I'm excited to hear all of this. We will save some time at the end for questions and answers. So feel free to post those in the chat along the way and we'll make sure to circle back to those at the end. But over to you, Cindy.
Okay, I'm going to start with a bit of an overview about Central Lane 911. So we are one of 3 911 centers in Lane County. Can you hear me? Can everyone hear? Okay, good. Yeah. So we're Central Lane and we cover about 90% of Lane County. We go to the west about to Badger Mountain area. We go to the county line on the north. On the east side, it's a little bit different. We go to like the Clear Lake cutoff. And I'm not being exact here, so Stephen and Marcia would be able to give you the exacts. And we also cover the Highway 58 corridor as well to the county line. On the south end, we go just a little south of Cresswell for our coverage area. There's also a 911 center in Florence, and there's one in Cottage Grove. So we do dispatch the fire and EMS for Cottage Grove area. Even though they have their own 911 center, that dispatch center only dispatches Cottage Grove Police. So everything in the county area is dispatched by the Lane County Sheriff's Office, and everything for fire EMS is dispatched by us. So the only law enforcement agency that we dispatch is the Eugene Police Department. So calls that come in for the University of Oregon Police Department, Springfield Police, Coburg Police, Junction City Police, and the Lane County Sheriff's Office and State Police are all dispatched by different dispatch centers. We dispatch, also Oak Ridge Police and Oak Ridge Fire are dispatched by the Lane County Sheriff's Office. So we transfer a lot of calls to other dispatch centers. Since most of you live in the River Road, Santa Clara, Bethel area, we know there's a checkerboard of in the city and out of the city calls in that area. So if you happen to live at an address or reporting something that's occurring at a county address, we will transfer your call. We'll get the basic information just in case we lose you in the transfer. We don't want to not have your contact information to call you back. So then we'll send you to the sheriff's office, transfer you, and give a brief synopsis of the concern that you're calling about, as well as the address that you're calling from. Pretty much all of the services. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Andrea, and she's going to talk about our training program and about calling 911 and what to expect.
Okay. First of all, I wanted to kind of touch bases so you all know what kind of training our employees go through. Through the hiring process, they have an extensive hiring process, including a background investigation, a psychological exam, hearing, vision, drug screen, as well as an interview and multitasking test at the very beginning. Then once they're hired, they have 6 weeks of an in-house academy, and that includes learning our computer systems, learning about the laws, the civil laws, how to answer the phone, crisis communications, just a ton of stuff over 6 weeks time. In addition to that, they go to 3 weeks at the State Police Academy in Salem. In Oregon, we're one of very few states that all of our dispatchers have to be certified through the state. And so they go for a 3-week academy there. And then they are on what we call on the floor, where they're answering the phone with a coach sitting with them for usually about 3 months. And that coach is listening to every single phone call, every single thing. And at first they're guiding them in everything to say. And then as the trainee becomes better, knowledgeable, and able to handle some of the calls, the coach backs away a little bit. But right up until we have decided that they are quite capable of answering the phones on their own and handling whatever life throws at them, they have a coach sitting with them. And even after they're on their own and we say they're solo, they have somebody else in the room that can help them in case, because we all run into situations that is new or different. And so we a lot of times rely on each other with questions. So just a background on call taker training. One of the first things I wanted to talk about is when to call 911 and when to call the non-emergency line. What we say is call 911 if there's a threat to life or property. So and it's not late. So if your car was stolen last night or 2 days ago, you could call the business line. If you're watching your car drive away, call 911. So it's a matter of urgency. If it's a medical issue, it's always 911. If you need an ambulance and you aren't just going to drive yourself to the doctor, you call 911. If you were gone for a week on vacation and you come home and your house has been burglarized, you can call the business line because it's not urgent. It has already been done. So really it is with 911, it's an urgent matter that police have to get there now to solve this, or that fire and medics have to get there to save a life or to save your house from burning. Does that make sense? Okay. And if you aren't sure what number to call and you feel it's urgent, if you call 911, we may tell you, okay, this has already happened. You can call us back, but generally we can just take the information from you pretty quickly if it's a simple call. And I wanted to cover kind of what to expect when you call 911. we are going to ask you a ton of questions. That's what our call takers do. And we have whole classes on call questioning. The first thing that we are going to always ask you is, what is the location of your emergency? We need to know where to send help to. And this is, like Cindy had said, there are other dispatch centers in the area. And there's certain areas of the community, like the River Road area, that is in and out of the sheriff's department or Eugene police area. If it's a medical call, we dispatch it. But if it's a police call, it could be the jurisdiction of Lane County Sheriff's or Eugene Police. So we are first going to ask you, what is the location of the emergency? That's always going to be, and you can help us best by having that. You know, before you pick up the phone, know where you're at. Or if you're have a babysitter over at your location, have your address posted in case they have an emergency. Those little tools help us a lot. Anyway, we're going to ask you lots of questions. We're going to ask where it happened, what happened. We just want the facts. We don't need backstory. We don't want a whole lot of extra information. If we need more information, we're going to ask it. But understand that all the time that our employee or our call taker is asking you questions, they are not slowing down help. In an emergency, they are typing the information into the computer, and then they are sending it over to the dispatcher who's across the room, who is sending you help. So a lot of people become very frustrated with all of the questions because they feel like we're delaying help. But it is, we have one person that is solely talking to you on the phone and another person that's talking to the responders on the radio and sending them to you. Yeah, be calm, answer the questions. That's the fastest way to get the help. And any questions specific to any of that?
So I've been referring to you as dispatchers, and you're evidently not the dispatchers. What titles, how should I refer to you in your job as?
Well, we are both. We have
Okay.
the job duties entail call taking. All of our employees are trained. They either are sitting assigned answering phones, and we refer to them as call takers, or they're working at a radio position where they are dispatching. So calling them dispatchers is fine.
Mm-hmm.
It just depends on their job duty at the moment.
You said that they have to be certified. Do they take a test to get that certification, or is it just the process they go through?
They actually take numerous tests. We give them a test here when they are in their in-house academy, but at the state academy, they go through 3 weeks of training, and then they have to pass a final test as well there.
Oh, thank you.
Go ahead.
Because it's related to what you're describing. When I watched the presentation at the Whitaker neighborhood, there was a lot of discussion because they have a lot of calls there where a situation might be, maybe there's an argument in the streets and it's getting a little dicey, and it's not clear where it's going to go. Maybe it's not violent and threatening at that moment. And I think the advice that your colleagues were giving in that instance was, if you're in doubt and it is something that's happening right now, it's probably better to call 911 and let you make the decision, because you may have more information.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because we maybe aren't going to know the implications of some of the things we might be seeing.
Yeah. Anytime there's a fight or a disturbance or loud argument like that could turn into something pretty serious, you can call 911, and depending on the information you have or other callers have, we'll prioritize that with what else is going on and get help out there. And there's times if we ask you questions and we ask you who is involved, what are they doing? Do they have weapons? We're going to ask you a ton of questions, and it's okay to say, I don't know. You know, is it 2 males? Is it 2 females? How are you related? Are they neighbors? Do you know their names? We're going to ask you that. And if you don't know the answer, it's, you know, just, I don't know. And we'll go on to the next one. Well, what do they look like? And we'll ask for a description. And, you know, we want to know, is it a white male, a black male, a Hispanic male? What color hair, what color shirt or jacket, what color pants? Because we go out there and there's 5 people standing around. Who were the 2 people that were the most aggressive? And as you described, like in that example that you gave as an argument out in the street, we are going to want to know who the people are that we need to contact, because if we come up and we contact you and start talking to you, the people that were actually fighting have wandered away now.
Right.
I thought one item that stood out was you saying that you asked about the location of the emergency first. And I think that's really important, not only in calling 911, but in radio communications. And even if you're just calling your friend on a cell phone, if your situation is going to get dicey, saying that location first, if your phone dies or the call drops or something, even if that person doesn't know what happened to you or even who you are, they heard where you were at and could potentially send help. So I think that's an important call out just for all situations.
100%. That is and I have written on here, location, 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 because if we can get the location and we don't know anything else that's going on, we can send somebody out to check.
We also don't know where you are if you don't tell us. We don't have the same type of location services available to us that some like Domino's or Uber or some of those places may have better location information than we actually have in our phone systems.
Good point. I saw Tim has his hand up.
Yeah, my question is, how will you potentially triage the hundreds of calls you're going to get during an emergency, such as we're talking about in this meeting? Thank you.
And that's going to completely depend on what else is going on. And, you know, like I'll say an ice and windstorm. I know this week we're expecting a small windstorm, and, you know, with trees down and branches down and wires down, okay, the wires is going to come first, and the most populated areas the very sooner rather than later. And it's who's available, because we're also going to send people from call to call in those emergency or crisis situations.
Jerry?
And Jerry, you had a question?
Yeah, I do. So what happened to E911? Andrea, you say you don't know where we are. I thought E911 would tell you where we are.
If you call from your house phone, we do get your location. But so many people now are calling from cell phones, and the cell phone companies give us an area, and sometimes that area can be 1,000 yards. And that, if you're out in the woods, 1,000 yards isn't much. But if you're in a town, in an apartment complex, to 1,000 yards is quite a bit.
Okay. Thank you.
Kind of just to go off of that, there's the cell phone data, the location data is generally pretty accurate, but again, with neighboring houses, sometimes it's not accurate. And it's a matter of, if it's a matter of life and death, we are not going to be relying on what the cell phone information is telling us, because there are times that it is inaccurate. Sometimes we get a really accurate hit and it turns out to be accurate, but we never know it's accurate until we actually get there. So we always want that extra layer of confirmation.
Okay, if there's no other questions on that, I'll let Stephen go ahead and tell you about Cahoots responses.
So again, I'm Stephen King. I'm a dispatcher here. I've been here about 14 years at Central Lane. And I actually, right now, I'm maintaining our contracts and computer systems and things like that. And I've been talking to a lot of agencies around the country recently because of the, I guess, the exposure that our Cahoots program has gotten. And a lot of places, public safety agencies around the country are interested in similar programs. So in general, I don't know how familiar everyone is with Cahoots, but it is a partnership between Eugene Police Department and the Whitebird nonprofit. And they staff basically a medic and crisis counselor. They all have similar training, but there are two people. They're in a van, and they go and they have kind of multiple missions. It's typically mental and behavioral health crises, issues with substance abuse. So usually like immediate type things. Shelter concerns, and just public assistance. So it's a joint effort with Eugene Police and with the Whitebird Clinic. And so they are contracted, or at least our Cahoots, because Springfield now has their own Cahoots, but the Eugene Cahoots program only covers the city of Eugene. So we talk about the checkerboard area of River Road. They don't go outside of the city limits. They're not going into the county areas. It's just the boundaries of the program. In terms of knowing when Cahoots is appropriate, we don't put that burden onto our callers. Usually our call takers are the ones who are going to be kind of prodding in that direction. Callers can, of course, ask, hey, we need Cahoots over here. And we generally take that at face value. If they say, can I request Cahoots to check on somebody? Yes, the answer is yes. You usually can if they're in the limits. And people who ask for Cahoots is typically pretty accurate in terms of what we do send them to. So if someone is experiencing a mental health crisis and they want Cahoots to come and talk to them, see if they can help, a lot of people ask for that explicitly. They say, we want Cahoots to talk to this person, which is exactly what we'll do. We will put the information in and we dispatch them. One of our police dispatchers has radio contact with Cahoots and dispatches them to calls. They're not, they're not a replacement for the police department, but they do handle a lot of things on their own, but they are an excellent supplement. And there's a lot of times they will work with the police. You know, there's a violent scene or something like that. Well, Cahoots is, you know, if someone has a knife or something like that, we're generally not going to be sending Cahoots right in. The police go and they calm the situation down. They can then do a handoff to Cahoots because Cahoots is there for counseling for mental health crises, things like that. So in terms of knowing when Cahoots is appropriate, yes, you can ask for that. But what the situation you're describing, Andrea talked a lot about the call taker asking a lot of questions. And we will drill down to the point where we kind of have an understanding for who we're sending. Does this call need a medical response? Is it a police response? Is it a mental health issue? If that's the case, Cahoots is probably who we're going to be dispatching. Again, and I guess service area, I think I talked about that, but does anyone have any questions specific to Cahoots? That was a very broad, very general overview. I know we have a Q&A at the end, but if anyone has a burning question at the moment, I could take questions for that.
I have a question. My son witnessed a person who was sort of falling down and just totally out of it, and they were just laying by the side of the road. And he called Cahoots, or I guess he called the police and 911, and then they sent Cahoots out. And I guess they must have just checked him out and said, okay, he's gonna survive. So because they just gave him a bottle of water and said, take care of yourself or something. And so it's not like when somebody's in that situation, they're necessarily going to be taken to the hospital or something like that.
So Cahoots is for, I guess on one part of that is, I'm trying to think which is the first part to talk about, but on one side, Cahoots has a kind of a known clientele. There's people that are known to them. So sometimes they will go and they'll say, yep, I know that guy, and they'll just talk to him very briefly. And it's a situation, I don't want help. Well, Cahoots is not the police. They can't force help on anybody. If Cahoots goes out and the person says, no, leave me alone, then that's the end of the interaction. They aren't police officers and they aren't paramedics necessarily. Well, they don't serve that same function where someone has to sign a form to refuse services, against medical advice or something like that. So there is that kind of side of it. On the other half of it, some interactions are very different, where they will spend a lot of time, interviewing the person. The person clearly wants or needs help in some way, and then they're going to be, the interviewing them. Can we take you somewhere? What do you need? And sometimes Cahoots ends up calling for paramedics if someone is too, in a medically fragile state where they don't feel comfortable handling it themselves, even though they do have medical training and they can take people to the hospital and do that very frequently. But it is a very case-by-case basis. And the situation that you described, my gut instinct is this is probably someone they knew. They walked up and the person just kind of waved them off. And they're like, well, here, have a bottle of water, take care of yourself, which isn't an ideal situation. I understand from someone who lives in the area, like, well, this person has a problem. What's going on? And I don't really have necessarily an answer, but I can tell you that, that brief contact is certainly better than the alternative of someone, having a major medical situation and no one gets to them, or,
right.
Things like that. So they are very, very in touch with the community. Like they are people they talk to a lot. There's people they've never talked to before, and they kind of, some people they know, some people they don't, and they will approach every situation kind of as their training and experience dictates, I guess is my best explanation for that.
Right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Got a question.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, my experience with Cahoots and calling for them, I didn't call myself, but the supervisor did. And it took a long time for them to respond. And how do you control the expectations of the person on the phone who kind of must think this is the only problem you've got to handle? Why don't you get here sooner? Is there some way you control the expectations of a response?
For Cahoots, we are very explicit with that we do not have timelines for Cahoots. Cahoots is never a life or death response, if that makes sense. If someone is having a heart attack, that is not a Cahoots thing. That's a fire department with an ambulance, lights and sirens. They're coming right now. Because it's a matter of a couple minutes could be the difference between life and death. If that's the situation, Cahoots isn't going to be involved. The issue is we have a long-standing, there's usually a list for Cahoots of who's up next, how many calls. There's usually 10, 15, sometimes 20 or more calls waiting for their attention. And the triage of that is a joint effort between the Cahoots responders themselves and the dispatcher. And again, we're going to prioritize the things where, like, someone's laying by the side of the road, we need to check on them. That's going to kind of come first. Whereas if it's somebody who's having a mental health crisis, but they're with a friend and they're physically safe, that's going to take longer. Now, the problem is that with Cahoots, when they go out to something like that, a counseling request, because they provide counseling, like emergency counseling for the time, that can take an hour or 2 hours. And there's only a couple of Cahoots vans. And the deal is when they're committed to something like that, they can't just abandon that person and send this person right back into a mental health crisis by leaving them there without bringing them somewhere or helping to resolve their issue. So the timelines, we try to be very clear with callers in terms of managing those expectations like you were talking about. We try to explain we can't provide you a timeline or an ETA for Cahoots simply because of the nature of their work. If something changes, if there is a situation where it might be a medical emergency, you need to call us back or let us know if something has changed so we can send the fire department. Or if this turns into a violent encounter or a dispute or some kind, the police need to be involved, something like that. So it's a major thing that we deal with, and we try to be very upfront about the limitations and how fast they can get there, because there usually are only 2 to 3 vans available at any time, and their timelines are they're not like paramedics where it's like we bring them to the hospital and we clear them, we're available. So we do try to be very transparent about that with people when they call. It's not always easy to explain all of that in detail though.
Thank you.
All right, if anybody, no one else has any immediate questions for that, I can turn it over to Marcia.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Can you estimate how many calls roughly you get out in Santa Clara?
For Cahoots specifically, or
for Cahoots specifically?
I don't know what it would be geographically, although I could start actually try to look. I have some access to some statistical things, so I will go and take a peek and see if I can find you some numbers for a little later on. But in the meantime, I am going to turn it over to Marcia to talk about our medical calls.
Great, thanks.
All right, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the protocols that we use for our medical calls. The questions and the instructions we give you are not just something that we make up off the top of our head. It's a protocol that we're trained on. So there's about 48 hours of in-class training on the protocols that we use. And they are an international protocol. They're used by about 50 different countries around the world. Like London Ambulance Service uses it. It's their protocol that they use. So it's used all over the world. And there's a couple of us in our agency that works with a group between Washington and Oregon of different users of it. And we work with the Academy on making changes and updates and making the process run smoother. So the great thing about this protocol that we use is it's very specific. So there's a very set list of questions based on what information you give. Then we get the next question, and it deals with chest pain, heart attacks, childbirth, strokes. There's a whole gambit. There's about 32 different protocols, different ways we can go based on what you're describing. And then once we get the help sent to you, we then have instructions on how to instruct a caller on CPR, how to instruct how to help a husband or a friend help with childbirth. And we recently have added tourniquet instructions and have had quite a few successes since we've added those, both homemade tourniquets and the store-bought ones. Narcan instructions, how to do both the kits or the vials. And then even some as far as what to give instructions if a vehicle is stuck in water or an accelerator is stuck. So it has quite the variety of step-by-step instructions to give people in situations until the help can get there in person. So it's a very in-depth protocol. And sometimes we may sound a little robotic just because it's a very set questions and then very set instructions. But that way makes sure we're giving you the correct instructions. Any questions about the medical side?
So just so that I understand, so these protocols are if somebody is going into labor and there's no time to get them to the hospital.
Yeah, it could be anything. So yeah, if someone's in labor and they can't drive themselves, then we ask some questions. And we've had some that even like the shoulder is stuck under the hip and we have instructions how to get that. And we've had successes that we help them deliver those babies before they arrive. And so I unfortunately have not ever delivered a baby. Some people have delivered several. It's not something I've gotten to do, but that's one of the better calls to do when you get to hear the baby crying at the end of the phone call.
So this is, I think, very relevant to what our emergency preparedness committees are often talking about is, I mean, some people have some training, but many of us don't.
Yeah.
And if we're in a situation where we aren't going to be able to get help readily, but if we can still communicate with you, if that service isn't down,
Right.
This would be a really important resource.
Absolutely, yeah. And the instructions are even people who are trained in CPR, step them through it, because it's just easier if you're hearing, you know, now do this, and we have a counter that has you on the right pace for the chest compressions and tells you, you know, we know at what point you need to do the breaths versus the chest compression. So it's nice to have that extra support in the background.
Thank you.
Welcome.
I have the emergency alerting section, but I also wanted to mention recently we had a call taker providing CPR instructions, and the first person to arrive on scene was a law enforcement officer. That law enforcement officer asked for our call taker to continue providing instructions until the EMTs arrived, just because it was, even though they're well trained in CPR as police officers, they don't do it every day. And it was really helpful for them to have somebody talk them through it. So.
One other question. I think at that other presentation I saw, were up to like 3 births that you guys had assisted on in a certain period of time. How many would you say you've done?
I don't know. Marcia, do you have a sense of that?
I know we kind of go in spurts that we'll have several in a row. I think I've heard of 2 or 3 in the last couple months, but yeah, it just kind of, you know, ebbs and flows. So yeah.
And I haven't taken one of those calls in many, many years, but I've listened to recordings, and you sit there while that baby's being delivered, and as just listening, you hold your breath, and as soon as you hear that baby let out that first cry, it's like, oh, it's all going to be okay. So, but it is kind of, you do just kind of wait until you hear that baby cry. So emergency alerting, we are one of many places in Lane County that can issue emergency alerts. All of the law enforcement agencies have the ability, as do EWEB has the ability, and some of the public works departments. We partner, and emergency managers as well. We partner with all of those groups, the utilities, public safety, emergency management, and public works partner on a system that's called AlertSense. And it works really quite well for us. There's several different ways that emergency alerts can be sent. One of them is called the reverse 911, also known as SENS, or Community Emergency Notification System. That will hit a specific geographic area. It will hit the landlines within that area. And it will also hit cell phones if the owner of the cell phone has registered that cell phone with the county. So the way to do that is if you just do an internet search for Lane County Alert Me, it will take you to the application where you can register your cell phone to receive those alerts that are going out by the Community Emergency Notification System. We also have the Wireless Emergency Alerting System, also known as WEA. That system uses cell phone towers to reach cell phones within a specific geographic area. However, it's not very precise. And if you're trying to target a very small area, you're going to hit a much larger area because it does bounce off the cell phone towers. I talked with our partners at Lane County before just yesterday. And one thing that they really want people to know is if you receive a message and it doesn't refer to your specific geographic area, you don't need to call in and check on it, because that is one of the things that the phone lines are inundated with calls after an alert goes out. Maybe the incident is happening at River Road and the Chambers connector. And so if that's where the incident is happening and you live in, let's say you live in Southeast Eugene and you happen to get that alert, it doesn't apply to you. If you received it on your cell phone, it just went out over that, hitting the cell phone towers and getting your area. Several years ago, we did several curfew notifications using the WEA system, targeting the downtown area. but we hit people in Dexter who weren't very happy about being awakened with curfew notifications, but the theory is that you would rather catch, now, not necessarily with curfew warnings, but with, if there's an armed subject who is a risk to the community, I'd rather hit Dexter inadvertently and get everybody else that was truly at risk right now. But we're going to provide a general area that people should be concerned in. So there's no need to call if you get the message and you're wondering why you got it, there's no need to call. And hopefully there'll be more information available through press releases later to find out. The other thing is people are often, they'll see something pop up on their phone and they're not quite sure how to find that message again. I'm an iPhone user, so I just scroll down and my messages are still on display on my screen if I scroll down from the top, and until I clear them out, they'll still be there. But it's important to maybe know how your phone works ahead of time so that you know, and also to make sure that you have your emergency messaging enabled on your phone. And I can't speak to every phone and even every version of iPhone, but there are ways that you can, and actually if you just do an internet search or check YouTube on how to make sure emergency alerts are enabled on your phone, that can be useful. You had mentioned earlier about wanting to do some evacuation drills in your area, and Eugene Springfield Fire developed evacuation zones earlier this year, specifically for wildfires. And they have a bunch of different zones. I believe there were 50 zones throughout the Eugene Springfield area. So if you aren't familiar with your zone and what number zone you live in, you can look that up. I believe it's on the Eugene Springfield Fire Department website. And again, if we send out an alert for zone such and such, our intent is that if it's zone 43, we're also going to provide a kind of a basic generic area. So like if it's in Springfield, if that particular zone is in Springfield and you live in West Eugene, it's probably not going to impact you. So we may say in Springfield near the intersection of Main and 52nd. So, or something like that. So we're not going to give the whole boundary, but at least you'll know if you see an emergency evacuation for a specific zone, you'll have a general idea of what area and whether or not you should be concerned. We've done one test of the emergency alerting system this year in the McKenzie area, and there's going to be another big test. It's more an educational opportunity for the residents. They're doing it Saturday, November 20th. It's on a day when people are going to be home, so they can see if they get the alerts on their home phone, and also they can check on their cell phone. So that may be something to consider if you have an interest in doing something like that and working with Blaine County Emergency Management for some testing. Any questions about alerting? Charles-E.
Yes, I just would underscore that practices would be very nice. A rehearsal would be very nice. I'm skeptical about receiving those alerts. I get the FEMA ones all the time. I never get the Alert Sense ones.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And we haven't had, I can't think of any recent alerts that we've had in the River Road, Santa Clara area, which is fortunate.
But the rehearsals the testing would be very comforting.
But you've received the nationwide alerts
Absolutely.
And you actually have to enable your phone to receive those or sign up for them as well.
Correct. Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I can jump in really quickly. I did find a couple of those numbers. I wasn't able to sorry, kind of changing subject very quickly, but for Cahoots call numbers for the last 3 years, I wasn't able to narrow it down to Santa Clara exactly, but I have kind of the section of the River Road area, basically. It's everything north of the connector and then between the river and Northwest Expressway, and then in the city limits. So for calendar year 2020, out of 18,581 Cahoots calls in the whole city of Eugene, that geographical area had 784 calls that they responded to. And the numbers for the previous 2 years were pretty similar. So in the 650 to high 700 range for that vicinity. So not a huge percentage of the calls for that area, but they are, yeah. And unfortunately, I don't know how many of those are south of Beltline and how many of those are actually Santa Clara. I wasn't able to, our map polygons are only so fine tuned, but for that area, that's what we have.
Thanks, David. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I've got a question for you, Steve. What part of town, is it just mainly the downtown area that you get most of your calls, or, how does that work?
For Cahoots, downtown is kind of I would say downtown, and then to the west of downtown, I believe is, just from my experience without pulling numbers, is the core of where Cahoots is responding to. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that like a lot of services are there. For example, the dining room, they give people rides to the dining room or to the emergency room, to University District Hospital. So there's a lot of that back and forth within there. So they bring someone to the hospital, and then someone is in the ER and they pick them up and bring them somewhere else or talk to them. So they're doing double duty. So.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question for any of our 4 guests tonight. Speaking kind of mental health responses, what do any of you do to kind of keep your own mental health grounded? I'm sure this job is incredibly stressful. How do you maintain your own mental health after a long day's work or after something truly intense that you've experienced?
I would say that's not the easiest thing for most of us. It's a struggle to find healthy ways. Right now, there's a bunch of us doing a step challenge that we're, it's a bunch of people all over the nation, 911 people trying to make sure we get our steps in each day. I think just spending time with my children and friends and family outside of here, trying to do something outside of the job. But it is a hard part of the job. There are a few calls that stick with you for your whole career. Some of us have gotten good at, I can walk out this door and usually forget what has happened that day. People always like to ask, oh, what was a funny call, or what was a traumatic call? But in honesty, I think a lot of us just try to let it go out of our minds when we go home at the end of the day, and try to focus on our personal lives when we're not here.
And I mentioned the in-house academy and the state academy, and we do a lot of training on resiliency and on, just like Marcia said, we talk about making healthy choices, both eating and fitness. We don't always make those choices, but we at least talk about it and think about it and try. Additionally, we really encourage people to have outside interests outside of 911, and not just hang out with other people that work here or our police officers or firefighters. It's really important to maintain outside relationships with people that are not dealing with all these same problems all the time, because you kind of get a warped sense of what's real. It's, one of the things I talk about in the training is it's super important to have a good support network. We also have a peer support team, and so other people that work with us, we can talk to confidentially and discuss calls that bother us or things going on. And the city has an EAP program, employee assistance program, to get counseling if need be. Because all of those, it takes everything to remain healthy.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one thing police officers deal with maybe 1 or 2 big calls in a day, and a call taker or dispatcher can deal with many big calls in just an hour of time. So it's a lot. There's a lot of continual stress and a lot of adrenaline, the constant adrenaline rush without the ability to run it off. Like officers and firefighters can work off that adrenaline, and dispatchers have a much harder time with that. But we do have tools in place to help.
One of the things you commented on in the other meeting was that it's a little hard sometimes never to know. I get closure on calls. Can you speak to that a bit? Or you don't know the outcome, in other words, and you go from this intensity of being involved and then.
Yeah, it's a hard thing because you might say it's a big dispute downtown, and as soon as the cops get there, you hang up and you get on the next call and you never hear what happened. Especially with the pandemic, it's made it harder because some cops would, if they had a break in their shift, they would come and tell us after some of the bigger events what happened. But a lot of times it's you just go call to call, and you might hear about something, hear about the outcome. We do, on some big incidences, we do debriefs, stress debriefs jointly with the police officers. And so that's nice because they'll have the officers who responded and sometimes the detectives, so we can hear more of what happened, and it makes the closure just a little bit easier when you hear the outcomes. And we've even a few times been able to meet victims or babies that you birth. And so that's always a nice treat when you get to meet the people that you've helped.
Yeah, I bet that's helpful. And I want to put that reminder out to everybody on this call. I know everybody here is involved in the emergency preparedness world of some sort, whether it's just preparing your home or helping your community prepare, and that can be incredibly overwhelming. So make sure you're picking other interests and other hobbies and other topics to talk about, and reach out to anybody out here if you are feeling overwhelmed by any of it, because it can get overwhelming very quickly. We have about 3 minutes left. Yeah, Anne, go ahead.
I had a question. I was wondering if you worked 8-hour long shifts or you had shorter shifts, and also if you have volunteers or all paid positions, what's that?
We are all paid because you have to stay certified and do so many training hours in a year through the state. But our employees work 4 10s each week, so 4 days on and then 3 days off. And then unfortunately, some days they end up working a 15-hour day. If someone's out sick, if someone's out, someone has to work. We have a minimum staffing. And so some days are 15-hour days, but most of their days are 10-hour days.
Thank you.
And some of our employees choose to work quite a bit of overtime, and others don't choose and are required to. We'd have mandatory overtime.
All right, we are down to about 2 minutes left in our scheduled meeting time. If there are questions after this call, Sydney, are we able to reach out to you via email with those questions and have you and your team weigh in on that stuff?
Absolutely.
Okay, awesome. Any closing questions that anybody wants to get in before we part tonight?
I did, but I think I can send it an email because it might be. It's about emergency, for catastrophic emergency type of a question. So we can send that to them.
Okay.
Atlanta is leading by 6.
World Series update.
World Series update. Important. Thank you all, by the way.
Well, yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you for having us.
I am so in awe of the training you receive, and also I get the impression that some of you stay for many, many years in this job, which I think says a lot. Just really thank you.
Yeah.
Definitely, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, we appreciate all of your time tonight. This has been awesome, and We will reach out with any questions. We'll get this recording posted and shared with everybody as well. And if you have questions, feel free to reach out with those afterwards. But thank you guys very much for attending tonight, and we will talk to everybody again in December.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.